Hello, and welcome to part 2.2 of my Let's Talk About Pathfinder series. Let's Make a Character, Part 2, Feats, Skill Ranks, and Spellcasting. My name is Brother Patrick, and if you're curious about my credentials, or you're confused about where you are, I recommend you watch the first episode in this series to get the basics. Also, short disclaimer, this series first edition, not second edition. So if you're looking to get into 2E, that's great, congrats, you've picked a solid game, but that's not what I'm talking about today. Instead, I'm going to share with you part 2 of a step-by-step guide to build a 1E character paper to finished product. Now, once again, I'm going to be throwing a ton of information at you here, so feel free to pause the video, rewind, write stuff down, whatever you need. This information is covered in hundreds of pages in the core rulebook, but not everybody has access to a first edition core rulebook. For one thing, they are out of print, and also, not everybody learns better through reading or than through listening. Additionally, I've split this episode into 3 parts to be more easily digestible to you, the viewer. Now, if you're coming from the previous episode, you'll remember that we've got a 5th level human bard with 6 ability scores all lined up. We're going to move on to feat selection, as that is my usual logical next step in character creation. There are quite literally thousands of feats to offer, and Pathfinder has a lot of options that are, let's say, less than ideal for all but the most specific of builds. So I'm going to break down what is a good feat for this class/build in the later episodes on each class. For now, I need to talk about what is a feat and how do you select one. Now, feats are essentially abilities that could be granted by a class, but are generic and useful enough that anyone could theoretically be able to do them with a little bit of special training or talent. Plenty of feats are more useful to some characters than others. A cleric will likely never need Iron Will, but a fighter could always use a better will save. But the general rule is this is something outside the normal scope of your class abilities. Some of them will enhance your usual abilities, or even soften restrictions that your class places on you. Others can even open up abilities or actions you wouldn't normally have access to. The key thing to remember is that these are customization options. Like selecting your character's eye color or height, there are ways to make your 5th level bard unique from all other 5th level bards, as well as all other bards, and all other 5th level characters that aren't bards. We're going to be selecting feats that don't have any prerequisites, but it's important to keep in mind that if a feat has a prerequisite, you need to be able to meet that prerequisite before selecting the feat. You can't take power attack without a strength of 13. Also bear in mind that if you lose the prerequisite, you don't lose that feat permanently, just until you can meet the feat prerequisite again. So if you take strength damage and your power attack and your strength goes below 13, you can't power attack, but you can get healed of that damage and get power attack back. When do you select feats? Well, some classes get bonus feats at certain levels, most notably fighters, and every character gets a feat at every odd level. That's levels 1, 3, 5, and so on. If you're coming from 5th edition and that sounds really overpowered, keep in mind that feats are considerably more restricted and lower powered than Dungeons & Dragons versions of feats. As a rule, feats never increase or alter your ability scores directly, although they might let you apply them to things you couldn't normally, like getting your charisma to initiative. Lastly, as a human, we get 1 additional feat at 1st level just for being human, to represent humanity's versatility as a species. Now, our 5th level bard has 4 feats. 1 at 1st, 1 at 3rd, 1 at 5th, and an additional at 1st from being human. Feats are often used to augment specific combat abilities or to shore up low defenses, and that's exactly what we're going to use them for. Now, our first 2 feats from level 1 are Toughness and Weapon Finesse. Toughness gives us an extra hit point per level, which will shore up our d8 hit die and our 14 con. Weapon Finesse lets us modify our attack rolls using our Dexterity modifier rather than our Strength, which you'll remember we dumped last episode. Now, do note that in Pathfinder, you don't automatically get the option to hit with Dexterity. You need to be both wielding a weapon that specifies you can do so, and the Weapon Finesse feat. Additionally, you'll need more feats if you want to modify your damage rolls with Dexterity instead of Strength. Weapon Finesse only applies to attack rolls. Our 3rd feat is going to be Great Fortitude. If you'll recall from the last episode, bards have poor fortitude saves, and Great Fortitude nets us a +2 to all of those, which can and will save our life early and often. The last feat we're going to take is Persuasive. This feat grants us a +2 bonus to Diplomacy and Intimidate checks, and if you have 10 ranks in one of those skills, the bonus in that skill increases to +4. Remember last episode when I said that Pathfinder really lends itself to specialization? This is one of those situations. Why do you need a diplomacy score that high if you've already got a high charisma score? Well, sometimes you'll be rolling checks against really crafty opponents, and you want to guarantee success as much as you can. Being spectacularly good at 2 things is, according to the math and logic of this game, better than being okay at 6 things. And that's all feats. Sort of. There's thousands of them. But we're going to move on to skills. Like I said last episode, we have 40 skill ranks to work with, which might sound like a lot, except there's 35 skills to place ranks into, which is a little bit of a problem. The good news is you don't need to have ranks in every skill. That's what the party is for covering all the bases. The maximum number of skill ranks you can put into a specific skill is always equal to your level, so theoretically you can put max ranks into 8 skills, or you can max out a few of them and spread some ranks around, and that's what we're going to do. Now, as I keep saying, it's important to be good at things, so we're going to max out our perception check, because that's the most rolled skill in the game, our perform sing check, because that's bard, and our diplomacy check, because we're bards. We're going to scatter ranks here and there into other skills, but those are things we want to excel at as a bard. Every time we level up, we're going to max out those 3 skills. Now, bear in mind, every class is good at a lot of things and bad at a lot of other things. To represent this, we have what are called class skills, which are skills that we are assumed to be trained in just by virtue of having reached first level in a class. These are represented on the character sheet by filling in the little bubble next to the skill. The first time you put a rank in a skill that is a class skill, and only the first time, you get a permanent, untyped +3 bonus to that skill. If you put ranks in a skill that isn't a class skill, you don't get this bonus unless it later becomes a class skill. Also of importance is that Also of importance is that you also add in the relevant ability score modifier when you roll a skill check. The formula for any skill check is thus an ability score modifier, the number of ranks, and the d20 roll. If it's a class skill and you have ranks in it, you add that +3. If it's not a class skill, or if it's a class skill and you don't have ranks in it, you don't get the +3. Lastly, our persuasive feat gives us a permanent +2 to diplomacy and intimidate checks. That gives us a base diplomacy at 5th level of +14, which if you're coming from 5th edition D&D, sounds like really high. And it is! We want to be good at this. Okay, so we've covered feats and skills. I want to talk about spellcasting. The Bard table that is in the core rulebook, or on the D20 PFSRD, or on the Archives of Nethys, whatever page you're looking at Bard, it has 2 separate charts to tell you how many spells you have. A spells per day chart and a spells known chart. Your spells per day tells you how many times a day you can cast a spell of a specific level, but it lies to you. The Bard chart says a 5th level Bard has 4 first level spells and 2 second level spells per day. But that's not true, because there's a line in the Bard description, and only one line, that says, in addition, he receives bonus spells per day if he has a high charisma score. See table, ability modifiers, and bonus spells. Now, we have a charisma of 19, and we get an additional first and an additional second level spell per day, according to that table, which isn't on the Bard page. So, our actual total spells per day is 5 first and 3 second level spells per day. Now, the spells known is a little bit simpler, because this chart does not lie to us. As a 5th level bard, we can cast 6 0-level spells per day, any number of times in any combination. These are called cantrips. Most characters will use these sparingly, because they're very, very weak. This is in contrast to D&D 5e, where cantrips are usually kinda useful. We also know 4 first level spells, which again, we can cast in any combination of for a total of 5 castings per day. And then lastly, we know 3 second level spells, which coincidentally we can cast 3 times per day in any combination. Do note that Pathfinder does not have such thing as a short rest. You get your spells back after 8 hours, and only after 8 hours of rest. Now, a bard's spell choices are his own, and there's a lot of them. And depending on your background and what you expect to be fighting, there are spells that range from incredibly useful to completely useless, depending entirely on the circumstances. So I'm not going to go into which spell we should choose here, because I'll get to that when we get to the bard episode and talk about what spells you should and shouldn't be taking as a bard. Depending on circumstances such as your class, your setting, the balance of the rest of the party, so on and so forth. I am instead going to point out something a bit silly about spells, and that's arcane spell failure chance. All arcane spellcasters, and only arcane spellcasters, not divine or psychic spellcasters, have a percent chance of failing to cast a spell while wearing armor, as determined by the armor type. Except not exactly, because a lot of arcane spellcasters have a caveat under their weapon and armor proficiencies that says, you can cast spells from this class in light armor while using a shield without incurring arcane spell failure chance, which is goofy and really specific. In fact, the literal dozens of ways to cast arcane spells in Pathfinder, there are only 4 that incur arcane spell failure chance all the time. Wizards, witches, sorcerers, and arcanists, which if you're keeping score at home, the 4 9-level arcane spellcasters. This is not a coincidence. The game designers knew how powerful those classes would be and put in a you can't wear armor clause to make them easier to fight back against. As a bard, we are allowed to cast bard spells while wearing light armor, which makes our lives easier in combat. And that's episode 2.2 of Let's Make a Character. Again, congrats on making it this far. Tune in next time for class features and equipment, and then we'll be done with character creation. If you like this video, don't worry about like and subscribe nonsense, just support the Archives of Nethys on Patreon. Those guys are my heroes. I will put a link in the notes. If you have questions and comments or concerns, you can reach me in the comments below, or at brother-patrick on Reddit. Thank you for watching, and as always, be well, my friends.